So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Translation Manchester monthly seminar series. My name is Alessandro. I'm Translational Research Manager at the university, and I manage Translation Manchester together with Jim, who is on the call today and does all the hard work bringing all these events to life. As you know, this series has been designed to promote and bring together the Translation Manchester Research Network. So this is a collection of facilities and institutions around the university, but also in the partners organization, which are all aimed at supporting translational research. You can find the details of all the facilities, including the contact details, in our booklet that is downloadable from the website. Jim will probably post a link to that in the chat. And the idea is that each month, a couple of members of the network will come to this series and present how they can and when they can support your translational journey. All the events are recorded, can be watched on our YouTube channel. The link will be also posted in the chat. And this is it, really. We hope that this is going to be a way in which you can find your support you need for your translational research needs. Before we start, just wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping and Zoom etiquette rules. So it'd be great if you could keep your camera off and your microphone on mute, obviously with the exception of the speakers. This is to avoid to disturb the speaker during their talk. And also if you can make use of the chat function during the presentation so that when the presentation ends, we can ask the question to the speaker without losing too much time. We can also ask the question directly at the end if you wish to do so. And finally, there is going to be a quick Zoom poll at the end, just to gather some feedback to see if this series is in the format you wish it to go ahead. So without further ado, I'd like to move to the first talk of the day. It is my pleasure to introduce Alison Robinson and Joanna Bryant from the Research and Innovation team within the Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. Alison and Joanna will tell us how the team of research and innovation managers at MFT can support the development and deployment of innovation within the trust. Joanna, Alison, the floor is all yours.
Thanks very much. We have quite a vast structure at Manchester Foundation Trust, which grows year on year. As you probably are aware, we've had North Manchester join us in April, which makes us even bigger than ever. One of the largest trusts in the country. So I'm going to be talking on behalf of the research and innovation managers who I line manage across the trust. There's 6 of them. And Jo's going to talk a little bit about how she supports the research and innovation managers at MFT with NIHR grants. So next slide. So if you don't know already about MFT, I'm sure most of you are aware of the size of it, but just as an introduction, it's just the size of the population we serve, and now with North, it's even more. We are the largest provider of specialist services in the UK. So lots of scope for seeking the right patients for innovative and translational research. Next slide. So the Trust has research and innovation right at the core of its vision. And obviously it's to improve health and quality of life. And we have a very diverse population, as you probably are already aware, across Manchester. And we want to build an organisation that excels in research and innovation and teaching. And also that we attract the right people and retain good people so that we can move forward with our research and innovation and become very well known as an internationally renowned healthcare provider. Next slide. So in research and innovation, we build that vision and ethos into how we work, and we do want to improve lives and give the opportunity to all patients in clinical studies and evaluation. And across each of the hospitals in our trust, there's 10 now. These are all the hospitals, if you're aware of them, across South Manchester, North Manchester and Central Manchester. And our research and innovation managers cover all those areas, the 6 of them. So they're spread quite thinly, even though most hospital trusts don't have so many research and innovation managers serving each of the hospitals. They usually just have a research office. So I think we're quite blessed in MFT that we have an infrastructure that enables us to reach out to those hospitals. Next slide. So this is basically the structure. We all report into a joint group medical director. So each of the hospitals have CEOs and medical directors, and then there's a joint group medical director. And our managing director for research innovation is Ian McLean. He reports directly into the joint group medical director. So it's really quite senior in the infrastructure of MFT. And alongside that, we have Rick Boddy, who is the group director. He reports into the group director of research and innovation as well. So the structure changed when Ian McLean took the helm as managing director, which was not that long ago, about a year ago now, a year and a half. And he's created all these heads of. So we have a head of innovation, a head of research office, research delivery, and nursing. And the research and innovation managers fall under the research delivery arm of the infrastructure. And I report into the head of research delivery, Claire Cole. And the research and innovation managers all have clinical trials managers and coordinators under them right across the trust. There's about 500 to 600 staff that work in research and innovation across the trust. So it's not, it's quite an undertaking to work in terms of systems and processes and who to talk to. Also, I'm going to just introduce very quickly the innovation team. Only because some of the work and the aims of R&I will incorporate the innovation team, which I'll introduce in a second. Next slide. So the main priorities for R&I for MFT are generating clinical research capacity and new trial opportunities, which very much falls under the research delivery work streams. And also recognising strength in diagnostics and how to integrate them. And I think that falls under our innovation team more so with the DETA initiative that still exists. It's managed under them. And also building comprehensive capability in health informatics and data science. We've recently created the clinical data science unit, which is building the capacity to extract valuable existing data through our NHS systems. So that's a real feather in our cap to have that going forward with artificial intelligence initiatives and studies that are mushrooming all over the place. Developing the next generation NHS researchers and increasing capacity. It's very much our interest to expand the capability of potential researchers, clinicians, training them, and again, there's lots of focus on this nationally and funding that's becoming available to enable that to happen as well. Establishing a vibrant innovation campus around City Labs. If you're not aware of the MFT campus surrounding the hospitals or alongside the hospitals, there's a group of City Lab buildings which is encouraging industry and small to medium enterprise businesses to move into the campus so that they're adjacent to the patient population and the research infrastructure that they can work with. And we've already seen successes with the City Labs 1, and we've got 2, 3 and 4 all in the process of either being built, or in planning. Next slide. So this is the innovation team. Catherine Boylan reports into Ian, and it's a very small team. And you may remember an organisation called Trust Tech, and that still exists and serves the Northwest, and probably larger than that actually, for NHS innovation and advice, intellectual property exploitation. And this is the team that we've created just purely to support MFT. And also you'll find that the University of Manchester has their own innovation team, and we work together when there are intellectual property co-created across the campus. But these are the people that you would contact in the innovation team. And the next slide shows their projects that they're working on currently. And there you'll see the CDSU, the DETA, in terms of strategic funding programs, and innovation adoption, as well as commercialisation and partnerships. So just moving back to the research and innovation managers, next slide. The time point that you are likely to want support or to talk to research and innovation managers is basically at the translation pathways shown there at patient level. You'll either want patient samples to enable you to do your lab research, or you actually want to trial different therapies or treatments with patients. So we're quite far down the pathway, and obviously you've got your BRC that is working with researchers in the university. It's clinical academics that work across both the university and the trust. But this very clearly describes where we would come in that process. Next slide. So what do R&I managers do? We shorten their name to RAMES, if you hear that bandied about. The main responsibility is similar to the research support managers in the university in budgetary sense, that when you're creating grant applications, the research and innovation managers, RAMES, have budgetary responsibility, and they have groups of people working across all the specialty areas underneath them. So in the past, they had responsibility just purely for a hospital portfolio of research. They're now actually restructured so that looking after specialties across all the 10 hospitals. So if you want somebody to support you with diabetes, you go to the RAME that covers diabetes, and that would enable them to support and advise across Wythenshawe hospitals, North Manchester Hospital, and MRI if it's adults. The only dedicated RAMES per hospital are the St Mary's Hospital and the Children's Hospital. And Kate Barugh is a St Mary's RAME. She was going to present today, but there is a strategic meeting with the St Mary's at the same time, so she's gone to that. And Helen Blackburn is the Children's Hospital RAME, and the rest of the RAMEs, the other 4, are spread across all the specialties across all the hospitals. So they support grant applications and help with enabling other outputs from research so that we can communicate our research successfully through communication channels. And they also line manage all the non-clinical research delivery staff. As you saw on the previous structure, there's a nursing infrastructure as well, and matrons that manage those staff. So we're very closely linked. The RAMEs are aligned with matrons in terms of staff management. They also conduct risk assessments and performance manage. So this is where they change from being a research support manager type role into governance and oversight, and generally troubleshooting any problems that might come up in the delivery of the research with patients across campus, financial or otherwise. There's lots of training involved, and liaison with the hospitals that they're working with, the associate medical directors for research that we've appointed across the trust, and liaison with industry as well, so or other partners, non-commercial partners that we want to collaborate with. And also collaborating with the innovation team to help support the protection and exploitation of innovations, just ultimately to improve the delivery of the care that we give to patients. Next slide. So just focusing a little bit more on the costings, you'll find that people that don't work in the NHS don't understand what costs are relevant. And if you're preparing a grant application for a funding body that doesn't necessarily, if you're leading on the grant application from the university's perspective, the one main point is highlighted there, that what we're trying to achieve when we're costing is to make sure that NHS budgets are not paying for research. And that's the underlying principle, really. So this sentence you'll find in paperwork, national paperwork that's come through from the Department of Health and NIHR, is making sure that we quantify and fund the full cost of research, because it's seen as a different purse that comes through, a different channel to pay for research. It's not core business for the NHS in that sense. So the RAIMs are responsible for making sure these costs are covered, and they do this with the help of the teams that they have working for them and the clinicians. And this is essential to be able to confirm that we have the capacity and the means to run the study. So sounds very logical. So many types of research that are conducted are outside what is deemed standard care in the NHS. So most of what you do in research pretty much should cost something. Next slide. So I'm going to introduce Jo, because we've only got the 15 minutes, so we can't cover everything that everybody does, and it's very diverse roles, research and innovation managers. And Jo is essential to support the NIHR grants, and she works so closely with the RAIMs to ensure that all grants across the trust are supported. And I'll stop there and allow Jo to step in at this point and continue with her presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. So my name's Jo Bryant. I'm the NIHR Grants Research Assistant. I provide specialist support for all NIHR grant applications across the Trust. It gives me a kind of bird's eye view of what's going on in the Trust at any given time. The NIHR is one of the more popular funding routes for the Trust. And so part of that role includes reviewing proposals and looking at what the possible costing implications are, checking eligibility and call-specific deadlines. The NIHR are known for changing deadlines without necessarily making a fanfare about it, and having very, very long guidance documents. So I kind of provide a almost signposting service and making sure that people are aware of the kind of eligibility criteria and the guidelines. I coordinate the costings, and I've mentioned the Surrey CAT there. I'm going to be doing a slide about that later on. I also signpost to internal and external collaborators or stakeholders. So if it's you know, a mixture of trust and university staff, I'll of course liaise with the research support managers and officers at the university here in Manchester, but also at different trusts and universities across the country. So I kind of build those relationships with people and make sure the costings are sorted out in time. Coordinating deadlines, we'll see in a couple of slides time about how much we actually need to manage in the course of a call, and what we need to sort out before a deadline arrives. So I'll talk about that later, as well as facilitating institutional signatures. Generally, I'll collate together applications that require signatures and make sure that everything's in place for those. But I'll also do some kind of more proactive, maybe some more strategic stuff. So I provide deadline updates on a monthly basis for NIHR calls. So if anyone's interested in that, you can contact me and I provide those monthly updates. I also do call matching. So if people have ideas or proposals that they want to kind of move forward and they're not sure which NIHR call they want to go to, then of course that's an option as well. Streamline processes, so workflows, checklists, work instructions to make sure that we can provide an effective, efficient service, especially given how deadline oriented it is. And then also training and outreach. So sessions like this, but also providing support to clinical trials coordinators or managers who are involved in grant applications as well. I'm conscious that time is short, so I'll make this very much a whistle stop tour. So we've recently updated flowcharts on what's involved in the grant applications process. These are available on the MFT intranet, but if you're not MFT staff, you won't be able to access this. So again, please feel free to contact me and I'm happy to send you those flowcharts. So at the moment, we've just got a flowchart for fellowships and also for project grants. So I'll give you an example in the next slide, but before that, I just wanted to highlight the fact that we've been collaborating with the NIHR Northwest RDS. So we've spoken quite a lot with Andy Vail, and he's helped us out with our successful NIHR grants writing workshop, which is the next edition of which is coming up on June the 10th. So the Eventbrite link can be seen at the bottom here. And you can click on it through the slides. So don't worry about reading all of this now. It's just to give you a kind of indication of what the flowchart looks like, what kind of deadlines we're working towards, and why we have these kind of deadlines. Why do we ask people to come to us 8 to 10 weeks in advance? So hopefully that will give a bit more of a flavour as to why we need so much notice. So key points from that, so approach us early, at least 8 to 10 weeks. All clinical trials must be reviewed by our Sponsorship and Governance Oversight Committee, or SAGO. And so this requires planning and careful deadline management. Notifying us of signatories or letters of support that are required. This is often senior people in the trust, senior management. So we need to make sure that this is on their radar as early as possible, so we don't rush around at the last minute. Most grants are 2-stage if it's NIHR, so we prefer to make sure everything's in place at stage 1, such as the detailed costings and SORICAT, so that it minimises hassle at stage 2. Research for patient benefit grants must be mass peer reviewed. So that's something that's really important in the internal deadline process. There's so much information about the SORICAT. I won't go into the detail about it now, but it's basically a tool that we use to attribute costs and determine whether it's a treatment cost, a service support cost, or a research cost. And it's usually submitted at stage 2 for validation by an accord specialist, but we complete it at stage 1. So I'll leave the information there and people can look at the slides at a later point. And I'm just going to leave you with a few very quick top tips. So again, 8 to 10 weeks in advance. That applies regardless of the funder. You know, if any NHS involvement is likely in your grant, please do approach us at the earliest possible stage, because as Alison said, everything does have a cost. Pay careful attention to eligibility and funding limits. It does vary between the NIHR and research councils. So if you need advice, contact us. Keep us in the loop, keep communicating, come to us early, even if you're resubmitting. That's really important. And 2 very important things that tend to get overlooked: PPIE and equality, diversity and inclusion. We have the vocal team who provide specialist PPIE support, but also EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion is really, really important. The NIHR do feedback on it. So I recommend that you read up on the links that we have put on the slides. So if there's anything we're not sure about, I'm aware this was a whistle-stop tour, so thank you for bearing with me on that. But please feel free to ask. These are our contact details, and Alison will send a full list of the RAIMs and the specialities they cover later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo.
Thank you both. That was a great overview on what's happening within the trust, because the university staff normally doesn't have that exposure. So it's great that today we were able to give that. We have time for a couple of quick questions. So there is one in the chat from Scott from Volatile DX. He's asking if you work with those small, medium enterprises for grant applications.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. And obviously with the NIHR Eye for Eye, there's usually an SME that is intended to lead on that. So we tend to work closely with the innovation team, because it's usually about developing AI or developing software or developing devices. And we definitely want to encourage more integration with people that would be hopefully based within the City Labs buildings. Proximity is important. So yeah, we work with SMEs all the time. And one thing that we find with SMEs is they don't have the research governance infrastructure. And the feeling within MFT is that we should be able to support SMEs if they're linked with a clinician in developing their product. And, you know, with the right funding available, we should be able to support them through the research governance processes. We've got a large infrastructure, and that's one of our aims in the very near future, to try and help with that.
Great. Thank you, Alison. Hope that answered your question, Scott. In terms of the other side, the academics, I know you mentioned that people should be contacting you when they're between T1 and T3, but I wonder if there is scope for researchers early on in the translational pathway, you know, if they need really links with clinicians. This is a query that comes pretty much every day and they don't have that link yet. Are you in a position to provide that link? And
absolutely, yeah. Just because we say that's likely the point at which you're going to be working with us, we're very close partners. You know, this is why we changed Manchester's name from Central Manchester University Trust to Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. We are seen as very close partners. So it's just about connecting people to the right people. Then absolutely the infrastructure that we have for R&I are your go-to people. And we have biobanks that are available to support sample collection and moving samples about as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure we will send people your way. And
not
also,
too many at once.
Of course. And Joe, I'll definitely be in touch with you about the NIHR monthly updates. Perhaps we can find a way to circulate that more widely within the university as well as the trust. That would be great.
Yes,
Good.
I'll be happy to.
Good. Thank you both for the presentation. We can then move on to our second talk of the day. We're back at the university now, and it's my pleasure to welcome back, actually, Professor Andy Vail at the seminar series. Andy is Professor of Clinical Biostatistics in the School of Health Sciences and leads the Biostatistics Collaboration Unit. So today he will tell us a little bit about how the BCU can provide biostatistics support to researchers pre and post award. We think this is particularly relevant because in the summer, Translation Manchester is launching some access to expertise funding call, which you might be able to apply for funding to work with Andy and his team for biostatistics support. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thanks, Joe, for the plug for the Research Design Service. Today I'm here, but I'm talking about the Biostatistics Collaboration Unit. And it's a complete change of pace. So here's the solution for all your lockdown woes and you know, your 15 months of quiet is a statistics test. So imagine the simplest experiment we can. The researcher is interested in knowing what proportion of cats are tabbies. So this is as simple as an experiment can be, and sends me, the research assistant, out on an evening, and I come back and say, well, I saw 4 of the 10 cats I saw were tabbies. So what is the best guess as to the proportion of cats that will be tabbies in the population of cats? And this is my screening question. So many of you will be thinking, I suspect, that the answer is 4 out of 10. That's the obvious best guess. And what I can't do with everybody's videos off and responses is see any responses of anyone who's putting their hand up saying, no, that's not the answer. Or anyone who's saying, yes, of course, that's the answer. So what if I was to suggest actually the answer might be 33% instead of 40%, 3 out of 9? Well, that could be the answer. In fact, it would be the answer if what you did was go out that evening and say, I'm going to look for cats, and when I've seen a reasonable number, let's say 4, I'm going to see how many cats in total I've had to observe to get that number 4, and that's when I'm going to stop my study. In fact, then the answer would be 3 out of 9. And in fact, of course, the answer could be almost anything, because this is statistics. And the crucial point is, it will depend on how you design that experiment. Seeing 4 out of 10 cats does not tell you how you designed the experiment. It only tells you what data you have. So that's the statistics test over. I can't see how many people passed it and how many people were quite happy with the 4 out of 10 answer. But when we're talking about translational research, we're almost always talking about a statistics exercise. So this is the collation of quantitative data for usually numerical analysis and interpretation. So that's almost the definition of statistics. So whenever you're undertaking translational research, you are undertaking statistics. There are a very, very small proportion of studies that don't involve statistical activity. What happens in the basic sciences? Well, how can I say this? Let's be unequivocal. If you didn't respond, it depends. As soon as you saw my question on the first slide, then if you actually go through that activity of collating and analysing and interpreting and reporting statistical data, you are working beyond your competence. And you might want to consider whether that has implications for the scientific conduct and actually for professional activity. So is there a problem? Yes. Here's an article in Nature from many years ago. Why current publication practices distort science, and it slates the biological sciences as a whole. Obviously there are rare exceptions, but in general, statistical considerations tend to be very, very poorly dealt with in the basic science literature. Has that improved over time? No. 5 years later, here's a news feature in Nature. P-values are not as reliable as many scientists assume. Basic scientists don't understand P-values. And another 5 years later, coming more up to the modern time, scientists, again, statisticians, epidemiologists, are saying, for heaven's sake, you don't understand P-values, you don't understand statistical analysis, please stop getting it wrong. So is it all doom and gloom? Well, in clinical research, things are different. And so for many translational researchers that I see, they're coming from life sciences research and edging into clinical research. And it's a bit of a culture shock. Clinical research is usually multidisciplinary. We saw from Alison's slides, the eagle eye will have spotted that there's a statistics group within the trust to help you with your research. The NIHR themselves define core disciplines for grant applications, which obviously includes statistics, because almost everything is about the collection and interpretation of quantitative data. Health economics, behavioural science, patient-public involvement are all core to NIHR studies. And in the International Conference for Harmonisation, Good Clinical Practice Guidelines, it is assumed that statistical work will be done by someone who's appropriately qualified and experienced. I don't know who assumes that, because in practice, it's very rare that that's the case. But in clinical trials undertaken to the international standards, that has to be the case, and the sign-off has to come from a statistician. So why would you need biostatistics collaboration? What would that look like? Really, you should have a senior biostatistician within your team, or at least giving input to your team. They have expertise in the design, analysis, and interpretation of quantitative data. And it'd be usual in academic research to have that statistician as a co-applicant or a named collaborator, depending on the level of engagement with the team. And it would also be good practice, of course, to include costs for the undertaking of the statistical work that will be required during the project, which is usually done at a more junior level, a research associate, research assistant, research fellow, because that takes a lot of time and it's a lot of number crunching, and it can be done by someone who's relatively cheap. So as an example, the clinical trials model, when you apply to the NIHR for clinical trials funding or to any of the major charities, this will be a fairly standard model, that there will be a senior statistician as a co-applicant with a small percentage of their time for supervision of statistical aspects of the study, and that there'll be a junior statistician whose jobs will involve making sure the data collection forms and the data management mechanisms are going to provide valid data for analysis, undertaking interim monitoring of the accruing data, making sure things are going to plan, programming the analyses, drawing the graphs, making up the tables correctly, and co-authoring the paper, of course, with the methods and results sections, and some input to the discussion about the strengths and weaknesses and plausible implications. As a rule of thumb, we would say a third of a statistician throughout a clinical trial would be the going rate. You could say, well, actually, it's not really a third throughout. It's about 30 or 40% at the preliminary stages where you're setting up the data collection mechanisms. It's maybe only 10% throughout the actual patient recruitment phase, and it's 50 to 100% at the end. But what we find is that funding bodies actually tell us they'd much rather see it as an average throughout rather than sort of in bits and pieces. And it's much easier to budget that way, of course. For other statistical designs, you'll see almost nothing changed in that slide. So again, you'll need the senior statistical co-applicant. The research associate, research assistant, research fellow still has all those same things to do. There's probably not so much in the way of interim data monitoring going on as there are for the trial steering committees and trial management groups and data monitoring committees that are required for clinical trials. But still there's data validation to undertake and checking assumptions throughout. And typically, I would say, although it's not so well established, clinical trials are relatively easy from a statistical perspective. Other studies tend to require more statistical time rather than less. So what can we do about this? Well, we set up a few years ago a Biostatistics Collaboration unit within the faculty, and the idea is that we are there to collaborate with researchers who want to undertake clinical research, and that obviously includes most translational researchers. So we're there to collaborate with you on internal bids, such as the access to expertise. We can provide a statistician as your expertise that you're accessing. But also for external funding bids to the MRC, to CRUK, BHF, Wellcome, NIHR, and other major charities and funding bodies. We'll provide the expertise in the research design, the quantitative analysis and data interpretation that you need for clinical research. And as a guide that's sort of currently staffed, you'll see there we have one sort of senior research fellow, we have a number of people at sort of lecturer and research fellow grade, and a larger number at the sort of cheaper grades where funders are much more happy to pay for people. But notice that these are all academic and research staff. This is not a sort of service, a sort of technical support service. This is an academic collaboration. There's a clue in the name, Biostatistics Collaboration Unit. We are interested in academic collaboration and making sure that things are being done in a statistically sound way. What are the advantages of this? Well, the faculty likes this. It means we have full recovery of costs for the work that's being done. The funders love this. It means they're being reassured that the statistical work is being done by professional statisticians and will be done correctly. Research teams usually like this when they get their heads around it. They normally end up with higher quality publications and are much more likely to get the funding in the first place. And the other advantage, of course, is that there's cover for the team if somebody goes off on parental leave, for instance, they can be replaced through the collaboration unit. It's also possible to appoint to part-time posts, which is very important, of course, because if you advertise, I want 30% of a senior academic for a period of time, you're unlikely to recruit to that post unless they're already in post. So the Biostatistics Collaboration model allows people to appoint these part-time posts, short-term, which would be impossible to advertise for really. And the staff involved in the collaboration unit love this because it allows them to have career progression, professional support from a statistics team rather than sitting in isolation for a short and indeterminate amount of time with a research team. So just to finish, if you want to know more about us, there's our website there within the university system. You can email us at biostatsinquiries@Manchester, and there are links there to our close colleagues and collaborators, the NIHR Research Design Service in the Northwest and the Manchester Clinical Trials Unit. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. That was a great overview of your unit. We've got a question from Scott in the chat. And do you partner with small medium enterprises to submission of grants? So do you support also SMEs?
Absolutely. If they're applying for a grant, we would, like any other university unit, you'd collaborate with us as you would with anyone else within the university system.
So is that the case of contacting that email address and getting in touch with you, explaining what the requirements are? Does it need to have a collaboration within the university, or?
Well, we would be those collaborators within the university.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be an established collaboration already because you'll be covered. No. Good, that's great. So hopefully, Scott, you're happy with that answer. And I do, if anyone has any other question, please pop them in the chat or raise your hand. In the meantime, I do have a question for you, if that's okay. Obviously, your talk was focused on clinical research, and that's a very important aspect of translational research. But as you know, we support also preclinical research. So, you know, like in vivo animal studies or even in vitro studies that are still in the translational pathway, but preclinical. Is that covered by your other studies? And do you provide support also for those, or you're mostly clinical?
So yes, we would collaborate with preclinical researchers as well. There's no reason why not. There's an expectation and a culture within clinical research that it's done in a multidisciplinary way. There hasn't been historically that culture of multidisciplinary work in the basic sciences, and that was the point of my first slide, really saying, actually, it's scandalous. It's unprofessional, and it would be considered scientific misconduct if it weren't being done by everybody in the field. That culture isn't there.
I agree with you. And I mean, I was more thinking about people in that D3 to D4 space that are almost impatient, and they do really probably need this kind of support. So in terms of the pre-award support, then does the academic contact you, and how long does the conversation take in order to have, you know, like a paragraph to put into the grant application, or even in an expression of interest? How long?
Yes. So it's not a question of adding in a paragraph, you know, about the sample size. It's about looking at the whole design of the study, making sure the design is going to efficiently answer the question, and that there is an analysis that will unequivocally answer that question, rather than you know, there being contentious alternative interpretations when you get to the end of the study. So it's about thinking ahead about how you can interpret your study at the time of design, when it's, you know, still possible to change that and do something about it.
Good.
So,
thank you.
And it takes as long as any other academic collaboration to build and maintain trust and so on.
That's great. Thank you. I'm conscious that we are running out of time, but there is another question that requires a short comment, perhaps, from Feng. They're mentioning that they're losing a lot of SMEs as partners because the university is quite an expensive, is expensive to cost them in. So what's your thought on that? You know, they're losing them at the grant stage because the costing from the university is too high. Have you got any comments on that?
I suspect that's to do with the full economic costings. I don't know. You know, I can't control the price of these things. Our junior statisticians are MSc trained on the whole rather than PhD trained. So they're coming at grade 5 on the university scales, which is cheaper than a postdoc. but they will, they will want to make sure that the design of the study is right as well as the analysis being right. The example about the tabbies is trivial, but is designed to show you that even the most basic question, actually, you can't, the statistical software can't analyze that question without knowing what the design of the experiment was.
Yeah, I agree. Well, if there is any more question for Andy, we can follow that up in an email perhaps, but I'd like to draw this event to a close, if that's okay. I'd like to thank you, all the speakers for today, and you for attending. We only got 1 minute left. If you guys can wait for a poll, just to understand if you are finding this series useful. So that should be going up at the moment. If you could answer, that would be great. And just to mention that the next event will be on the 23rd of June at the same time, 1 p.m. And we have Medicine Discovery Catapult and Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult presenting. So this is another opportunity for HUE. So if you do plan to submit an access to expertise application with the Medicine Discovery Catapult, with the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, do attend. And if you want to submit one with Andy, just make contact with him. The call will be open in the summer with funding released in November. So having said that, I'll thank you everyone for attending, and I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alessandro.